us, as we like to do at the beginning, every time we get together, is just stop for a moment. Craig and I are both based in Calgary, which is where the main campus of SAIT is also based. SAIT always acknowledges that it is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region. That's the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. Alberta covers Treaty 6, 7, and 8, I believe. And if you're joining us from outside of Alberta, we hope that you've taken a moment to recognize the land that you're connected to. For all of us, this traditional land is a place where we walk in the footprints of our Métis people.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, and we still have attendees rolling in here. Dolly, I see you have your hand up. Is that accidental, or if you do have a chat or a comment, please throw it in the chat. And this is, there we go. And so, yeah, as Jenny mentioned, as you're coming in here, folks, feel free to use the chat to share your comments and thoughts. And if you have a question as we go through, please do use the Q&A function. It makes it much simpler to parse that out. As you see, that's okay, Dolly, no need to apologize. As you can see, the chat is just a waterfall and very easy to miss some of these things. So we're here to talk about leadership today, and it's clearly a important topic. Thank you all. This is probably the largest group we have had register since we've started these conversations. So there's clearly something in this topic that resonates or feels important to each of you as to why you're here. And you know, I think Jenny and I have started this conversation a few months ago now. You know, as we've gone through the last 18, now 19, going on 20 months of the pandemic, there's a lot that's happened. And I think one of the things that we're trying to figure out as SAIT, and I think we've landed on a bit of a path forward, is how do we help organizations build their leadership capacity? How do we help you as individual leaders build your leadership capacity? We've kind of taken a look, and there's really kind of 6 big trends that we're seeing, I think, that are really impacting leadership, which leads into what we're going to talk about today. But if you think about it, you know, people are burned out, people are resigning, leaders are dealing with this, leaders are resigning. Like, leadership pipelines and organizations are going to need to be revitalized, without a doubt. Companies are becoming increasingly digital. And so how do you lead in that digital age? The demand for essential skills for leaders and for their direct reports is not dying away. It's increasing, in fact. If you want to be a highly flexible and responsive organization, you need very empathic leadership. Leaders need to be able to demonstrate empathy and be able to help their teams with that. Leader and employee well-being probably goes without saying, but man, what an important topic that has become, especially not only from physical health, but mental health over the past few months. I need to throw all of this in there, and employees and leaders still expect their organizations to help contribute to their development and develop new skills. Throw on top all of that, every leader here is responsible for still achieving the goals that the company's put on them. So there's some big, heavy things here. And to make this adjustment, leadership development kind of has to change with the times as we're going along, right? You can't have all these changes, but then not change your approach. What's the old definition of insanity, right? Right? Do the same thing, expecting a different result. It's not going to quite work. So, Jenny, I think that is where we wanted to set the stage today. And by the way, if any of you are interested in diving deeper into the 6 trends that I very quickly ran through there, please let me know. My team is happy to have a conversation with you and take you through those in more detail. So, Jenny, over to you to kind of start the point around the 6 intelligences to address leadership development.
All right, thank you. And yes, those 6 trends are worth digging into in there. As usual, we have some slides. We have a lot of our conversation, but we are also leaning on you. So anytime if you have a question, feel free to pop that in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I think when we started this big conversation a long time ago, and I do have a picture for Friday morning right there. Let's just get away from this one. And the big question that sort of hangs over us came from Aaron Dignan originally, is what's stopping you from doing your best work? And Craig, you mentioned 18, 19 months of pandemic, which in itself is exhausting. We hear the term these days, people are either burnt out or they know they're burnt out, and it's that simple. And we get onto autopilot and we're just doing what we do. And, you know, we're feeling it again. We've just got slammed back home with more restrictions and people are sort of rebounding left, right, and center. And the first piece that we did was stop and look at, you know, what is getting in the way? And the other piece too, as you said, is how have we always done it before? And so initially in leadership, we knew that IQ is important. And so you were promoted because you were good at your job. You had that technical experience. A little bit along the way, we began to realize that emotional intelligence, EQ, had a really important piece. How do you get on with the people around you, and how smart are you with emotions? Are basically data, that information there. And now, if you look at sort of the black and white piece, everybody, and you mentioned this, everybody is sort of quoting that DQ, that digital intelligence. And that's really important too. But there's a whole piece in the middle that we have to have in place if we want to be successful across that board. And so I've given you two of them, emotional intelligence and digital intelligence. And then I think sitting in there, the four that allow that big picture to come together is social intelligence, adaptability intelligence, psychological safety. It feels wrong to stick the word intelligence on the end, but we can if we need to, and collaborative intelligence as well. And so when we do that, we had a picture, didn't we? We were working with those cogs. If you think of the cogs in a machine, and when you put them all together, it just runs seamlessly. And that's our aim when we're helping leaders, is to be able to allow that to run smoothly.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Right? So you talk about the intelligences needing to work together.
Mm-hmm.
We were chatting before we came live. Is that, you know, it's kind of like having a great ingredient for a meal, but if you don't have all the other supporting ingredients, seasonings, right technique, right tools, you could spoil that ingredient pretty quickly. You need to be able to have everything working together, and that's where. You know, I really like the approach that you've developed here, Jenny, around how do we focus on these 6 areas to build more complete leaders, right? And it's like, you know, for me, you talk about emotional intelligence, social intelligence. You know, there's been times over the past 18 months, I know I've definitely not demonstrated that with my team. Hopefully, you know, it's been good that I've recognized that at times where I know I've missed it, but you know, I think the key thing for me is, how do you put these all together? And as a leader, how do you consciously work on it? It is so easy in your day-to-day to just get wrapped up in the waterfall of email, the fire that's going on over here. You know, we now have to deal with restrictions again. It's very easy to get wrapped up in the moment and not sometimes come up for air and take a look at what you were doing to develop yourself as a leader, what you're doing to develop your team of leaders. So this is a really interesting approach. So again, folks, feel free to throw comments in the chat, questions. I'm going to put a question out to the group. And so Jenny's listed the 6 intelligences. We're going to dive into each one a little bit more. But when we say you need to be able to develop social intelligence, what do you think that means to you? Or what does that mean to you? Right? It's not a test, so there will be no grades handed out here, but I'm just curious. What is the phrase social intelligence? What ideas, thoughts does that bring to mind? If you just want to throw, there we go, reading people around you, read the room.
Interesting to read the room straight away, yeah.
Yeah, being able to pick up on social cues, having a pulse on the morale of your team, which would be different than having a pulse on the morals of your team.
Pretty close on there. And one of the things we'll notice with these intelligences, Craig, as we work through, there is overlap. And that's another piece that hits in there. So you saw one where it was sort of that trust piece in relationships, and yes, and you'd obviously see that in psychological safety as well.
Yeah. Leading and coaching without authority, I like that.
There was one flip through there, I just saw the human elements, and I think that captures us quite nicely. Let's get, whoops. There you go, a little overview. Quick, get it out of the way before everybody sees it.
There you
Yeah.
go. There it is from Tyler. Focus on the human elements. So, and by the way, good morning, Tyler. Good to see you.
There we are. So social intelligence, to pick up on what everybody said, our sort of capstone thought behind that, and we can see them still coming in. You're right, communication is a big piece of this. We're talking about people and we're talking about culture, and how do we get that performance piece? Classically, performance was all about the numbers, which actually is results. So how do you get the performance that creates those results? Social intelligence at its roots is embracing the power of team and achieving performance within the conditions that you're in. And the pandemic provides us with so many beautiful examples, because the conditions we're now in today are different than they were yesterday. But our job is still to get that sort of performance from the team there. And the picture is curious to me. It always comes back to, it was Ben Zander who uses the analogy, is that a conductor gets the best music from his orchestra without making a sound at all. And so that social intelligence is allowing that team to flourish within the conditions that they're in at that stage.
Perfect. Yeah, it's interesting. Open the communication feed. There's some really good conversation comments still coming in here. Yeah. So that's really good. And so, yeah, I like the way you also talked about, there is overlap, but again, it goes back to that cog analogy, right? Your cogs aren't going to work if there's not some overlap in those as they move forward. So, so we talk about social intelligence. What about psychological safety? Again, I'm going to put this out to the group. So psychological safety intelligence, you're right. It doesn't quite sound right. But
you didn't have the same ring.
Yeah, PSI is an acronym that's already taken. So folks, there we go. Feel free, feeling safe, speaking up without fear of retaliation. Other thoughts, or knowing how far to push the team.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
That's
actually that could be a conversation in itself as we go forward, Jenny.
Yeah. Kerry, we see your comment. We're not allowed to pick up on that one, but we see your comment. It's funny. Yeah. Asking questions, even if not sure. Yeah, there's a lot coming into here. That environment of trust and psychological safety really does pull on that trust aspect as well. In fact, I would expect in any place where we're talking, there's a lead in with trust. Trust is the foundation of everything that we do. And when we think about it, business is run on conversation. It's our conversation that leads to a new lead approach. It's our conversation that decides whether we're coming to work tomorrow or working from home tomorrow. And when we're in conversation, our relationship is founded on trust. And if everybody who's in here and listening, just think for a moment, you're going to go have a conversation with somebody that you trust, and you're going to have a conversation with somebody that you don't trust. Like, without even thinking too hard on a Friday morning, your body language is changing, your mindset is changing, your energy is changing. And so when we can build that trust with the people around us, that's sort of the gate that opens into psychological safety, as a lot of people captured in there. Psychological safety is when we can reduce the interpersonal risk. And so people will ask questions, people will challenge the status quo. And we often think we've got it set up for people to challenge the status quo. My first question to a leader always is, when were you last challenged? And how did that go? Because it's not easy. And so building that place so it's safe, so that what we want to get rid of is the expressions career limiting move and career suicide. And then we know we're onto a good stretch there. So psychological safety, as we pretty much picked up, I think, there in the chat, those interpersonal risks, being able to share your concerns, ask the questions, whatever the question is, and take those risks. So there's a lot of conversation in there about destigmatizing failure. And how do we make that safe for people to say, well, this didn't work. I sat with one of our other instructors yesterday, actually co-presented, and he used the analogy 4 out of 6. I'm going to try 6 things. We have to be prepared for 4 of them to fail. That's a different conversation than we were having 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Absolutely, right. And it's interesting too, not to go too far down this fail fast rabbit hole, but the ability to truly define what that is and how you implement and learn from a fail fast culture is a skill in and of itself, right? It's really simple to say, yeah, well, you know what, let's just go fail quickly. If you're not taking anything away from that learning or making sure that you're not repeating the same mistake, holy crow, you are setting yourself up for some tremendous failure. Emily had a great comment in there that I see some folks have picked up on. Yeah, you can't move faster than the speed of trust. That's really good. That could be a chapter in your book, Jenny. So
Emily, I'll be in touch.
Yeah, we'll have to give Emily some royalties on that one. So, and then Bart, yeah, knowing your own limits and when to get advice. That's an interesting comment as well, too, right? If being able as a leader to go to others for advice on your, what's the word, performance as a leader, right? If you don't have that space where you are feeling safe to do that, it's going to be very difficult for you to make that leap. Yeah, Lyle, I love this comment as well too. When we talk about failure, if you go up to the bat and you hit 300, odds are you're going to be in the Hall of Fame, right? You fail in 70% of the time and you're still succeeding. So I love that stat. So social intelligence, psychological safety. When you come together as a team, you also need to be able to exhibit collaborative intelligence, right? So maybe we can touch on that one for a little bit. So when I throw it out to the group, when we talk about collaborative intelligence, what comes to mind? Knowing how to work with others, teamwork, harnessing strengths, deploy, not reply. Emily, you're dropping some truth bombs out here
this morning. Yeah, that's awesome. I like this. I like the sort of message that's coming in. There's a piece there about open. There's a piece there about support. There's a piece there about sort of respect and getting the best from everybody as well.
Yeah.
Once we let those come in,
leveraging diversity. I wanted to pick up on that because I've seen the diversity comment come through here a few times, and I think it definitely plays across all of these intelligences, right? And collaboration as well. So thank you for throwing that one out, Rob. Sorry, Jenny, carry on.
That's okay. I was just going to find, we have slides for all of them, but I won't bring them up on each one, but let's see if this will let us get to there this time. There we go. So pretty much we've captured it, I think, to more depth in the chat than I'm going to give you here. But it is how do we come together, think together, work together, and it ties. I'm so glad you brought it in after psychological safety, Craig, because it ties very much to that psychological safety. Collaboration won't happen won't happen well if psychological safety is not in place. And so when we collaborate, we want that intellectual friction to be high, social friction to be low. And that's one of the parts of that sort of social process that pulls in collaboration. There's pieces in the chat, is moving too fast for me to be able to watch and think all at the same time. But when we're looking at collaboration, we're shifting, we're moving away, like everything in leadership, we're shifting. And we used to think of collaboration as coercion. So I would say, this is my idea, what do you all think? And we would have collaborated on that. Whereas now it starts with, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Or here's the problem and how can we solve that piece? So much sort of more open approach towards it. And I just caught Michael's comment in the chat there at the end, that ability to listen. And we all think we're great at listening, but when we're going to collaborate, we really have to listen, whatever way you want to put it, actively, generously, whatever that piece may be, we need to listen carefully for sure.
well played, Justin. Um, so this is good, right? And so as we continue to build here too, we touched on a really important one to start with. I think you kind of gave the bookends of emotional intelligence and digital intelligence, right? Let's come back to emotional intelligence because it is so foundational. I would be curious, folks, again, your thoughts, your ideas around emotional intelligence, and maybe how does it play a little bit differently, perhaps, than some of the others when we talk about social intelligence and so on.
Megan, I like that. Know thyself. Yes, that's a huge piece within there, that self-awareness to all that data coming through.
Yeah. I'm running into a bit of a technical issue here. I've lost the chat, so that's okay.
Okay, I see the chat. Can you see the Q&A?
I can see that.
Okay.
Carry on.
I'll try and watch the chat a little bit careful. We've got a lot of the word empathy is appearing time and time and time again, which is spot on. Empathy is in fact one of the competencies that we would measure in emotional intelligence. And I remember much earlier in the chat, somebody had asked empathy or compassion. Two different things, absolutely. I think leaders need both to answer that original question from there. I often attach compassion, thanks to Deb Herlock, who introduced me to the idea of compassionate accountability. And that was a great combination of words in the same sentence, because we get a little bit worried about that compassion piece and how much should we give to as a leader. And sometimes it's tough. We have to push that little bit. So compassionate accountability, empathy, that ability to allow people to be going through what they're going through and to be there for them as well. We've got some really good answers coming up in the chat. I don't know if you can see it yet. A lot around. Gone?
No, it's gone.
Okay.
Which will lead in well to the next intelligence when we get there. So sorry for that, folks. I don't know why this has disappeared on me.
I can see it. We'll get there for sure. So emotional intelligence, let's sort of round this one in there so we can open up for some questions. We'll need some time at the end. It's really about conscious choice. And so we have data all the time. We're on an emotional roller coaster. Look at yesterday for a lot of people. And so what is our conscious choice with our thoughts, our feelings, and then we put those into action. And so all of you who mentioned that self-awareness piece, knowing what's going on for you, and then being intelligent about how you use that. When we look at a leader level, knowing what's going on for you, and then being able to use that in our relationships with other people as well. And so just making the best of that data, being able to perceive, being able to express emotions. A lot of our conversation behind these leadership intelligences, what are the key questions that hang out underneath all of these intelligences? And so underneath emotional intelligence, do I really have to show my emotions at work? Okay. Why would I? We've been taught for the longest time, don't bring that stuff to work. And that's another piece. Like, isn't this just more fluffy stuff? At what point can we just get on with the job? But emotional intelligence takes all that on board. It's being able to understand what's going on here and then use it appropriately that way, as well as reading. Those read the room and one of those other ones. That's emotional intelligence too.
Yeah, and I always think of this one too, around, you just touched on it there, is how do you check yourself, right? Before you check in, right? And if you're checking yourself and you're not in the right space to be engaging, being smart enough to kind of check out, right? So the emotional, and I think this is one, especially, I've somewhat struggled with this over the past year, because you go from being able to do that reading of yourself and the person you're with or the team that you're with live, to now trying to read cues on a screen, right? And you see somebody on the screen looking at the other one, which, for me, for the past couple of minutes has been trying to figure out what's going on with Zoom. It's still not fixed, but that leads us well into the next piece. So I'm going to have to rely on you, Jenny, to unfortunately double task here because I can't see the feed that's coming in anymore. I don't know why, but
Do you want to just, sorry, Craig, there's a couple of really good questions that have come up in the
perfect.
chat. And there was one about collaboration. I'm going to encourage you to pop those questions into the Q&A because Craig can see that piece and we can pick that up because it gets lost in the feed as it goes. We'll be able to see them later and we always answer them later, of course. But if you have an actual question, put it in the Q&A.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have lost the chat, the Q&A, and the attendee list. I don't know what has happened here, but it speaks to the importance of the next intelligence, and that is adaptability intelligence.
There you go.
There you go. And so, you know, I think we'll put this one out there for the group as well when we start talking about adaptability intelligence. What does it mean to you? And again, Jenny, I'll have to.
I'm hovering. I'm watching it now.
Be adaptable and rely on you to share what is.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of good questions. So once we've just got through these intelligences, we can hang out in there. So in terms of adaptability, what we're seeing in the chat, coping with change, yes. And let's move away from our standard change management that was around 10 years ago. We're talking about change leadership here, and there's a big difference. And you know when it's been missing as well. Lots of embracing change in here, rolling with the punches. Patty's mentioned resilience. That's a really good piece. Adaptability is how do we cope with the stress and the pressures of the what's going on around us, and that is resilience. And there's our own resilience, and then there's team resilience, and the two are very, very different. Being flexible, adapting, trying new approaches. Okay, what if there's many different ways for us to work? Let's get into there. Plan A, B, and C. I always used to say this to our children. We've got plan A, we've got plan B, but be ready. We'll be on plan Z by the end of the day. It's kind of the way it works. I like that idea too, reducing and eliminating cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when our brain is slightly out of whack. So how do we sort of reset and let that flatten and so that we can cope with it better? Continual change is coming in here. Recognize the need to change approach. Yeah, we don't want to change just for the sake of it, but we do want to embrace new ways of thinking, new ways of operating. And so adaptability intelligence really sort of sits with that. What's going on and how do we move through the disruption? How do we put that, mind Jim said, from fragile to agile? And we didn't want to call it agile intelligence because there's so much confusion around that agile piece in the software world, the project management world, agile with a capital A or a little a. So that adaptable piece means that we can just jive in the moment and make it work there. So a lot of change leadership, a lot of resilience. And then what are the new ways of working? Great example for us at the moment is performance management. We used to manage, or we used to judge, rate, whatever you like to say, on the badge of busy. You were at work at 7 and you were back to back right the way through till 5. We're always busy. Well, when we're at home and out of sight, it doesn't work so well. So there's a different way. What is that different way and how can we make that work?
Yeah, and I think if there's any intelligence that has risen in importance over the past 18, 19 months, well, this week, it's adaptability intelligence. You know, and I think this is the one, the ability or the amount of real-time decision making that is happening now is just, it can be overwhelming, right? What is true today, what is true at 8:30 this morning may not necessarily be true at 9:30. And so how do you as a leader really keep focused, and communication becomes so important. So moving on to the last intelligence then, which again ties in very apropos to the challenges I'm having here with technology this morning, but that's digital intelligence.
Yes, and this is truly the one that I perhaps don't feel qualified to speak so much about, but it is a big piece that's moving in. And so in digital intelligence, we have a huge army of experts sitting in our new school there at SAIT, but really what we're looking at is what are the competencies that a leader needs to lead in our new digital society. And so there's terms and pieces coming up about what does it mean to be digital? What is digital literacy? The one I'm really curious and I've really enjoyed looking into is digital well-being. because we saw, again, the pandemic. Like, pandemic just pressed fast forward on everything we had, but we were on screen for too many hours in the day and people were burning out faster. And how do we manage that piece? How do we manage the tool stacks that are in front of us? Because not every technology that's pushed in front of you is a great technology. And ask any member of our SADT school, it's about the people before it's about the technology. And so that digital intelligence really sort of captures all of that side of it too.
It's the mindsets and the strategies that go behind the use of digital tools. It's the how do you incorporate it to elevate your strategy versus simply implementing a tactic.
Absolutely.
Right? It's if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But just convert that to your digital world. It is going to be such an extremely important, and I think many of you on the line would clearly recognize this. We see what's happened over the past year and a half, right? It's not just about MS Teams or Zoom. It's about how do you engage in true collaboration in digital spaces? How do you use the tools, the digital tools, to accelerate your business? And at the end of the day, making sure that it's leading to better customer outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the vast majority of us on this line right now are delivering results for customers, whether they're internal or external. There's a customer at the end of all of these transactions, and how we're using digital to accelerate those. So there we go. We got through the 6 intelligences. Let's hop onto the questions now, Jenny, that you can see.
For sure. I just want to pick up on Ron's comments in the chat. Okay. How can you be authentic when when you're struggling to use the digital tools? Find the mute button. Again, it comes back to, we're all human and we're all people. And even I have lost the mute button from time to time, although my family always, I wish you had a mute button, Mum. So there we go. We have some great comments and pieces coming up in the chat. It's really difficult for us to stay absolutely on top of them. And there's only me now trying to stay on top of them as well. Usually I leave that all to Craig. So thank you for putting them in there. We will save the chat. We'll take a good look at it and find a way to share that comment, or share our thoughts too, if there's pieces hidden in there that we haven't been able to capture. You at home are probably, or at work, are able to read it much better than we are. So feel free to keep that conversation going in there. It's important. We have had some great questions coming in. I'm just going to scan through them now here as well. So it doesn't put a name to it, I'm afraid, but a lot of these intelligences, this is what's been asked here, require high self-awareness. What if you have a leader that thinks they're very self-aware, but do not seem to demonstrate that? It's a great question. And self-awareness is interesting. I think it was Kristen Neff who said, no, it was somebody else, I'm sorry, I got the wrong name. But if you ask a group of people, we would all say that we were highly self-aware. You're absolutely spot on. And in fact, the percentage of us that actually are self-aware is less than 10%. So generally across the board, we're all not very good at this. We talk a better game than we actually can carry out. If your leader's not self-aware, we're going to lean into social intelligence right there. What's the conversation that you need to have? And what's the appropriate conversation as well? Control the controllables. We can't change everything. So how's that affecting? How's that impacting? And then where can we build from that piece? It's difficult to get specific, but building the awareness takes time and it takes practice. And that's part of these intelligences is it's not now what you need to know, it's how. And self-awareness is a huge part of how as we look at it. When teams are not co-located, not in cubicles side by side, does a manager need to increase, decrease certain activities to maintain good collaboration? That's a great question. Yes, is the answer. And it's what we need to think about more carefully is, are we pushing information or pulling communication? I think that's probably a good way to put it. So if we're pushing information, we're not needing to bring people together. But if we get smarter about why we're bringing people in and what's going on, then we're changing those activities to increase collaboration. The other piece to note, when we're not co-located, we have to change the cadence of communication. So when you're out of sight, you can fall out of sync much quicker. And so how do we keep that cadence going so that we can bring people in? That's sort of a pre-step to collaboration. The pull, we want to pull people in if we're creating, connecting, or genuinely collaborating. Oh, now I can't hear you, Craig.
I think the other thing that comes to mind for me on that one too is, where are you at in the life cycle of your team in the situation, right? Mm-hmm. You think back to last March 16th, many of us may have been having daily check-ins with our team via Teams or Zoom, right? Which then changed to weekly, which then changed to the weekly happy hour. And that's slowly evolved over time. Clearly, you need to be able to adapt and move that style, that cadence, to your point, Jenny, as the situation is changing. So, yeah.
And the other piece too, I'd say, for those of you who are leaders listening, is this isn't all on your shoulders. So what does your team need? How does that work for them? And you're going to have different people in your team. There will be some who need to be held just a little bit more than others. And so what works for you and what do they need? You can pop some of that back on them a little bit as well. The question in the chat here, when we were in the office, managing by walking around was an effective strategy. Yes, you see, that was a thing, wasn't it? What's the digital equivalent is a good question. I don't have a fancy tagline to put on it for you, but it's changing that connection and communication piece. And so what does touching base look like? What does reaching out look like? I was chatting with the group yesterday, and we were talking about something that's been tagged as reverse meeting. So making that time in your day so people can just drop in via Teams or via Zoom for 10 minutes and then leave again. But you've got 2 hours in your calendar where you know that you could be dropped in on 3 or 4 times. Maybe you won't be, but you're not planning to do some kind of deep focus work in that place. So it's real a reverse. It's a flip again.
Yeah, I know that a couple folks, I tried this early on too, and I know some other folks who literally just open up the MS Teams meeting and sit there on camera and wait for folks to drop in.
Yeah.
It was very effective at times. So.
Yeah. There's another request in here. I mentioned intellectual friction high and social friction low earlier on. Comes from Tim Clark, who's one of the big researchers behind psychological safety. So when we collaborate, when we're involved in those perhaps harder conversations, maybe even creativity, innovation, whatever those pieces may be, what we want around the table is everybody, literally, really what we want is people to disagree. And so it's not very helpful if 8 of us come to the table, we all think the same way, and Jenny says, well, what about this? And everybody says, oh, yes, that's lovely. And if the intellectual friction is high, it might sound like, Jenny, I like that idea, and what if? And so we're building on that, and we'll challenge that piece. And Craig, you and I have been here. Here's some intelligence. No, we need to change this. We need to change that. And so that intellectual friction means we're safe. We have the candor to disagree, to ask questions. But the social friction being low means we still recognize and respect each other at the end. And in the workplace, we're not all going to be best of friends. But where we do get on, if that's something that we do, and we would go for a drink later, or we pass each other in the hallway, we still have that relationship piece.
Yeah.
And most of you on here, anybody who's heard me talk before, you can't get there without social capital as well. So you have to have those relationships, that trust in place for those to work.
Yeah, and I think you've actually shared on prior conversations, Jenny, an example of an exercise is the disagreement card, or the devil's advocate, right? When you're in those conversations, if you want to encourage it, assign people the role of playing the devil's advocate to the conversation, to poke holes in it, and it gives them that safety for everybody else around the table, knowing that is the role that they're playing. Now, you may get lucky that maybe the person who actually does want to poke holes in it, but that's beside the point, right? It's creating that safe space. How are we doing on the questions, Jenny?
I'm just heading back to have a look. We've got a couple more. Oh, we've got lots more in here.
Okay.
Let's have a I like this from Shauna has asked, you know, in our workplaces now we have younger leaders and older leaders. So we have different generations of leaders in there and sort of learning from each other, gaining proficiency in each of the intelligence areas. How would you suggest opening these lines of communication across leadership generations? Shauna, I think you answered the question in the question. And it's possibly as simple as opening the lines of communication. And so, how do we make it possible? How do we change that culture? We're talking about culture of learning. Bring the leaders together, leader networks, leader cohorts. Just the more conversation that we have, the more we open those lines of communication. When we're busy, we get stuck in the rut of doing what we've always done. But when we stop, think, and Craig, you spoke to this right at the beginning of the morning, is, you know, we have to pause, create the pause and make it safe for us to learn from each other. And in technically centric industries, this is from Andrea, many organizations promote technically strong performers into leadership. What have you found is a good place to start the conversation with those leaders to help them be open to this type of approach to leadership? This is a really interesting piece. We are seeing more and more companies provide two streams so that if you are technically strong, you can grow. What's the word I want? Sort of move up. It's not a great expression in that technical line and in that people line, because really leadership is about the people. And so if you're technical and being promoted, my next question is, do you want to lead?
Right.
And I think that's a great piece for companies to look at. Craig, you mentioned leadership pipeline. Like, who are the people who want to lead? Who are the people who like people? It blows my mind when I hear people say, well, I've spent 80% of my time dealing with people. Yes. If you're a leader, yes, maybe you do. And exactly. So if we're in that stage where we're still getting people who are being promoted because they're technically good, my first question always is, do they want to be a leader? And if they don't want to be a leader, do you have another option for them to grow that will meet them on the same return that they're looking for? If they do want to be a leader, then that's pretty much why we're here. And that's where the help comes from, is, you know, we have to take that time to build the self-awareness, build the intelligences, and very often lean in. When you've grown up in that technical competency piece, this hasn't been on your radar. Yeah. But we're all people and it helps. And so when you get that return, it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah. The other piece for this too is that it's how do you decouple people leadership from promotion and salary?
Yeah.
Right. Because quite often in many organizations, the only way to get to the next salary band is to become a leader, whether you want to, don't want to, can or can't. That is the only path to it. And so there's some organizational design thoughts that have to be put into how do you build these paths for folks who can excel at leadership and getting the most out of others, folks who are so technically, and then you lose those technical skills as they move to being leaders. So just wanted to come back here, Jenny. I know we're at 8:45 now. I think an important thing that we wanted to highlight through all of this is that, and I'm thinking slide 4, Jenny, as I can still see the slides, is just talking about the approach to how SAIT is going to approach this with organizations. And we very much welcome the opportunity to have the conversation with you. If we've tweaked some interest around the 6 intelligences, and again, I do apologize for my technical difficulties here. It's probably disjointed the conversation a little bit, but you know, the approach to the leadership approach of leading beyond any title. We've developed a new program specifically around the 6 intelligences, which is kicked off, and I see you're struggling with the technology now too. Is it?
There you go. It's not working for us today. Hold on a second. I'm going to stop sharing, Craig.
There you go. It fits very well. So essentially, the program has been developed around the 6 and the 6 intelligences, and how do we bring those to organizations? I don't know if you are still there, Jenny.
I am still here. You really are having
There are some very bizarre things going on here, folks.
the
We do
technical
apologize.
piece. Yeah. So
Yeah,
the approach is was what we're looking at is those six intelligences. Our framework is much more on how, not what. And the way that we've built this is within a journey. So looking at how, with everything, it's changing. So our conversations are different. How we move in between sessions, your classic old, I'm going to train your leaders, is we'll do 3 days in a row and boom, you're done, call yourself a leader now. This is what we're talking about now, is a journey. And that journey allows us to take that information and sort of put it into practice with support, with that applied support, and then come back and we'll look at a different intelligence and put it into practice. There's an awful lot wrapped up in this leadership approach. And really the piece that I would offer here is to connect with Craig, connect with Craig's team, and let's build the conversation, because we can sort of provide that journey across all of those intelligences in lots of different ways.
absolutely.
Craig, we just had a note in the chat that it's all good on our listeners' end, so they can see you, they can hear you, and they have everything. So just keep talking, you're fine.
Thank goodness, because I'm looking at 3 screens, which are currently only showing my desktop. Zoom has disappeared, so I have no idea what's going on here. This is an interesting experiment this morning, so I apologize to everybody who's watching me go through this. So Jenny, why don't you take us home then? We like to always kind of leave these conversations with, some practical strategies, some questions to think about, and then just comments about our upcoming activity as we close out the time.
Let's do that for sure. And so our big idea, you've heard it from us really, leadership is changing. And we, used to all be about strategy. Could you play the game to win? Whereas now I think very much it's much more about, gardener might not be the right expression here, but can you cultivate the conditions? Are you creating the right environment for people to hit their best game, to be able to perform in the workplace? And so in order to do that, we have to help our leaders grow, much like the garden grows. And that's what this whole big approach that we've been talking about is. 2 things to take away from here today. The first one is self-reflection. And we just need time. Create the pause for yourself somewhere today. Just take that stop moment, take a look. Maybe it's yourself as a leader, maybe it's your leadership pipeline, maybe it's the people around you. But what is the reflection that you need, and what would be the next best step to take? The other thing to take away today is, what is the next conversation that you need to have? And so if you're here as an individual contributor, you work by yourself, you're a solopreneur, whatever that may be, what's the conversation you're not having? How can you set yourself up for success on that one? Craig mentioned it, I've mentioned it, that pipeline is crucial. The pandemic, the great shift, the big resignation, whichever way around you want to put all of that, things are changing company-wise too. So take a moment to look at the fabric of your leadership pipeline and how healthy is that looking? And then tying into the self-reflection, what is your leadership need there? As always, one big idea, 2 applied strategies. We'll leave you with a few questions. And so the 3 questions we picked this week are just for you. You can share them with people if you like. They'll all create great conversation. What's your contribution today? We talk about expectations, we talk about numbers, but things change when we talk about contribution. Ask your team, what's their contribution, or what will their contribution be for next week? Where can we be more people positive? We've talked about all that side from the intelligences. It's all about being people positive. Ask yourself that question. And then we started with it. It's there. We can let that boat just drift. For sure, it'll get somewhere. But if you think about what's stopping you from doing your best work, it probably will allow you to change tack and reach the destination that you actually want to get to. As Craig said, we do like to close with, there's the one I was looking for, there's that leading beyond and the approach. So we'll get these slides out to you. Craig will be sending an email and let you know how to contact him and his team for sure. As he mentioned, We're back, and currently SATE is open on Monday. So these aren't the leadership approach intelligences, but as you can see, we have a lot of conversations happening on campus, and we're open with all the COVID rules and COVID instructions in place to make it a safe place to hang out. And then our final piece is we'll be back. We'll be back next Friday. Hopefully Zoom will be working for us properly. We'll be back on our true form. A question that's going to kick us off next week: how do you build discretionary effort? We'd all like it. And what we'll be talking about is how to build discretionary effort without affecting your bottom line, which may be a welcome piece in the year that we're having. Craig, we can still hear you. So if you want to close us,
that's excellent.
right ahead.
This has been the most awkward experience of my Zoom life. So thank you for all sharing it with me. I appreciate it. But thank you all for joining us this morning. We're looking forward to seeing you next week. And absolutely, we'll get the slides out and we'll have more information about the program, and happy to have those conversations. So with that, I will say goodbye. Have a great morning, and thanks again for joining us, and take care.
And I'll echo that as well. Have an excellent weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining us and staying with us despite the technologies. Take care.